Okay, so you've decided that you want to give KDP self-publishing a try. You did your research, you found a few good niches that have little competition but at the same time still have a couple of big sellers in them, and then after looking at your competitors' products, you're confident that you have something better to offer Amazon customers. But even though you're placing fairly high in the Amazon search results, you're still not selling anywhere near the number of books you think you should be every month. If this is something that you're going through right now, then it's time to step back and take a good hard look at your book covers. It doesn't matter how good your interior content is. If your book cover isn't grabbing the attention of Amazon customers in search, then no one's going to be clicking on your listing. And without that first initial click, no one's even going to be seeing your book's product page, let alone your amazing interior content. So what you need to do is create a book cover that's not only going to make an impression on Amazon customers right out of the gate, but it's also going to make your book stand out from all the other books that are in that niche. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to do just that. Hey guys, Craig here. Hope everybody's doing well. Alright, so in this video, I'm going to give you 10 tips on how to improve your KDP low content book covers. Tips that will help you make your book covers look more professional and more appealing to Amazon customers. So if you're ready, let's get to it. Tip 1. Always use a KDP cover template. Now this may seem like an obvious tip, but you'd be surprised at how many people contact me saying that KDP rejected their book cover and that they don't know why. And 80% of the time, it's due to an error in graphic placement. Now when I say use a KDP book cover template, there are two parts to doing that. The first is just to download the template and make sure that you've entered the correct number of pages that are going to be in your book. That number that you enter into the KDP template creator is going to determine the thickness of your book's spine. If you get that number wrong, none of your cover graphics are going to line up correctly. So any title graphics or images that you place on your book cover may appear slightly off center when it comes time to print. And if KDP notices this when they're reviewing your cover, there's a good chance that they'll reject it, because off-center graphics make the book look like it's a misprint, and misprints cost KDP money when they have to reprint it. But getting that page number count is not the only thing you need to do when using a KDP cover template. The second thing is, you need to make sure to open the template image up with whatever photo editing software you're using. And when I say open it up, I mean right-click on the image and choose the option to open with, as opposed to creating a new document with the dimensions of the image and then copying and pasting the template image onto the new document artboard. So why is it so important to do it this way? It's because you would be surprised at how many people who are trying to create a cover for an 8x10 book create a document that's 16 by 10 inches, and then they paste the template image onto the artboard and snap the image to the edges of their document, not even realizing that the cover template is accounting for the spine as well as bleed, and that it's actually larger than 16 by 10 inches. Or they get the proper dimensions for the template image and enter those in during the document setup, only to accidentally invert two of the numbers. Again, they paste the template image onto their document artboard and snap it to the edges, not even realizing that their document is the wrong size. I've had a few of my subscribers who are having rejection issues go back and lay out their book covers following these instructions, and sure enough, their covers were accepted. So regardless of which software you're using to create your book cover, whether it be Photoshop, Illustrator, Photopea, Canva, or any other software, always make sure that you're using a KDP cover template. Now for those of you who are using BookBolt to create your covers, the template that they provide is the same as KDP's, so you're good. And for those of you who are looking for software to create your book covers with and want to be able to research profitable niches at the same time, be sure to watch my video how to make $1,000 a month selling low content books using BookBolt. I'll put a link to it at the end of this video. Okay, on to tip number 2. Create your covers in CMYK. Okay, so let's start off with a few definitions. First of all, for those of you who are newer to graphic design, I want to explain the difference between RGB and CMYK. Now, regardless of which graphic design software you're using, when you create a new document, you'll be given the option to choose between one of two color modes, RGB or CMYK. RGB stands for red, green, blue. And what that basically means is that all of the colors that you can create while in the RGB color mode are made up of at least one or more of these three colors in different quantities. Most RGB colors are very rich and bright and are primarily used for digital media. So if you're going to be creating images or artwork that's going to be used for online advertising or in ebooks, then the RGB color mode is the way to go. Now CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Again, and what that basically means is that all of the colors that you can create while in the CMYK color mode are made up of at least one or more of these 4 colors in different quantities. CMYK colors tend to be a little less rich and a little more toned down in appearance, and they're primarily used for print. The reason that is because most printers print using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So if you're creating a document in CMYK, whatever it looks like on your monitor is pretty much what it's going to look like when it's printed out. That's not usually the case with RGB. From my experience, whenever I've printed out using RGB, the finished printed out product always comes out about 4 shades darker and far less vibrant than the digital version. Now don't get me wrong, it's not that the printed product looked bad, it's just that if you're expecting it to look the same as the digital version, you're probably going to be disappointed, because when it comes to RGB, the digital version is always going to look way better. So what I do to get the best print results possible is I set up all of my documents in CMYK. Then I just use the CMYK color panel to find the richest and most vibrant colors that I can. If I can get my book cover to look bright, rich, and vibrant on my computer screen in CMYK, then I know that my book cover will look amazing in print. Here's a little trick for you. When you're getting ready to pick your colors, go over to the Swatches tab and then click on the Swatches menu icon in the top right-hand corner. From the pop-up menu, go down to Open Swatch Library, up to Color Books, and then down to Pantone Solid Coated, and open up that swatch library. Now Pantone color swatches are neither RGB nor CMYK. They're actually made up of 13 base pigments, and they're referred to as a color matching system. Now to actually print in Pantone requires the printers to be set up in a special way, and this setup is more costly than printing in CMYK. And to be honest, I don't think KDP would even do it. But you're not going to use these swatches for your colors. You're going to use them as a reference or as a starting point for your colors. So just find a color that you like in the Pantone swatches and then double click on it. Now if you look at your color panel, it's going to show you that Pantone color. What I do is I just go up to the color panel menu icon and change the setting back to CMYK. Now I can see what the CMYK percentages would be for that particular Pantone swatch. But I don't leave it there. I just use that information as a starting point. Now I play with the sliders to get the color as rich and as vibrant as I possibly can on my monitor. Doing this will save you so much time when you're looking for a color, and you don't have to struggle with this stupid and precise eyedropper tool to find it. Now 2 things to keep in mind: every monitor has a different color setup, so there's sure to be slight variations from monitor to monitor. Therefore your actual print may not look exactly like what's on your monitor, especially if your monitor has been calibrated differently. Secondly, I use a Pantone color chart so that I know what the Pantone swatch I'm using looks like in print. Now you can buy one of these, but they cost around $150. But if you're planning on doing a lot of printing, they're worth the money. This one here is the best value for the money on Amazon. I'll put a link to it in the description below. But if you don't have that kind of money to spend, don't worry about it. You're going to get pretty good results just as long as you stick to the Pantone swatches. If you just make sure that the color settings that you're using in your graphics are very close to the settings of those Pantone swatches, you'll get quality print results pretty much every time. I have yet to be disappointed with the print quality of any of my book covers using this method. Give it a try, trust me, you won't regret it. Okay, on to tip 3. Add a graphical element to your cover's background. If you're finding that your book covers are looking a little flat or boring, try adding an image to the background of your cover. Now you don't want anything that's too overpowering. The image should be subtle, but visible enough to catch the viewer's eye. Even just the simplest graphic can make a huge difference. This is also an opportunity to tie the imagery from the front cover in with the back cover. This will give your overall book cover composition a little more unified look to it. I recommend making the color of your graphic element either 3 shades darker or 3 shades lighter than your base color, depending on whether your base color is dark or light. What you want to try and steer clear of is reducing the opacity of the graphic to lessen its impact, and I'll get into why that is in the next tip. What you're basically trying to achieve here is the illusion of depth. That subtle difference can make an amateur-looking book cover look a lot more professional. Give it a try. On to tip 4. Always collapse transparencies. Just to be clear, an unflattened or open transparency is just a layer inside of your document that has the opacity reduced below 100% when you export it out as a PDF. And as I said in the last tip, if you're trying to achieve a ghosted effect from a graphic, instead of lowering the opacity of a much darker color to get the lighter transparent effect that you're looking for, try using a slightly lighter color for the graphic that's much closer to your cover's base color. Because when you lower the layer's opacity to lighten the graphic, you're leaving an open transparency in your document, whereas the layer that uses the lighter color still has the opacity of 100%. But there are going to be times when that's just not going to work. An example would be when there's a layer in between your transparent layer and your base layer that you want to show through the transparency, like so. In this case, there has to be a transparency to pull this effect off. So what you're going to need to do this time is flatten your transparency layer. Now, depending on which software you're working in, there are a few ways you can do this. If you're working in raster software like Photoshop, the best thing to do is just convert your transparent layer into a smart object. And you can do this by right-clicking on the layer with the lowered opacity and choosing Convert to Smart Object. This will reset the opacity of the new layer to 100%, basically flattening the transparency. If for some reason your cover still gets rejected by KDP for having an open transparency, then try merging the transparent layer with either the layer above it or the layer below it. Either way will retain the transparent effect, as well as return the opacity of the new layer to 100%. Now, if you're working in vector software like Illustrator, what you need to do is select the layer with the lowered opacity using your direct selection tool. That's the white arrow. And then go up to Object in the top menu and down to Flatten Transparency. In the pop-up menu, just make sure to turn on Preserve Alpha Transparency. If you look at the opacity in the top menu, it's currently at 90%. Once I click the OK button, you can see that it is now changed to 100%. So the transparency in this layer has now been flattened. I'm only telling you to do this because I myself personally have had 2 book covers rejected by KDP due to unflattened transparencies. So just make sure that there aren't any open transparencies in your project before you export it out. Okay, on to tip number 5. Never add a border to the cover of your book. If you're someone who's a fan of borders, book covers are definitely not the place to use them. And it's not just borders. Any type of straight line that parallels the edge of the book is a no-no. Now, I myself am a graphic artist who definitely likes using borders when it comes to thumbnails and social media posts. I find that a nice thin border just finishes off the graphic perfectly. And there's nothing wrong with using borders, just as long as it's not for book covers that are being printed. And the reason for that is, there's no guarantee that the crop on the book cover will be perfectly straight, especially when it comes to print-on-demand books. When a printer is printing off 5,000 or more copies of a book, they're going to do their best to make sure that everything is lined up perfectly. The last thing that they want to find out is that they screwed up the cropping on 5,000 books. But with print-on-demand books, the printer is usually only printing 1 copy at a time, so the chances that the crop might be slightly off is always going to be there. Now, for most book covers, a minor offset cropping wouldn't even be noticeable. But if you have a straight line that runs parallel to the edge of the book cover, then even the slightest offset in the crop will stick out like a sore thumb. Now, if you're lucky, the printer will reprint it. But because reprints cost money and the person who's cropping it doesn't want to get fired, in most cases, they may just let it slide. Which means that your customer is going to receive a book that looks like it was poorly laid out, and you don't want that. So leave the straight lines and the borders to digital graphics and keep the printed book covers border-free. If you absolutely have to use straight lines on your cover, try to angle them so that they're not running parallel with the edge of your book cover. You can even carry the lines over to the back of the book to help unify the imagery of the overall cover. Okay, on to tip 6. Always break down your cover text into hierarchies. Just like you would in a blog article, you always want to be breaking down the text on your cover into hierarchies. So the main title of your book would be the largest font. Any subtitles or the author's name would be slightly smaller than the title. And then any other text that you place on the cover, like reviews or descriptions of the book's content, would be the smallest font size of all. Even though there's text on your book cover, your book cover as a whole is a graphic, not a text document, so treat it like one. A book cover needs to be visually appealing in order to catch a potential customer's attention while they're scrolling through the Amazon marketplace. The more you treat your cover as a graphic, the better chance you'll have of getting customers to your product page. And this brings us to tip number 7. Always use a unique font style for your title. I'll say it again. Your book cover is a graphic, not a text document. The more of an artistic feel your cover has, the more appealing it'll be to a potential buyer. The last thing you want to do is use some basic font like Times New Roman for all of the text on your cover. As good as your cover layout may be, it's still going to look like you did it in Microsoft Word. I recommend that the most stylized font on your cover be reserved for the book's title. The title is what needs to grab the viewer's attention first, so make it stand out. Then you can pretty much use any type of serif or sans serif font that you want for the subtitle, just as long as it's bold and it's not as stylized as your title font. As for the rest of the smaller text, just use whichever font you think best suits the theme of your book, just as long as it's legible. Now when it comes to the back of your book cover, use the same font style that you used for the smallest font on the front cover. This will give the front and back book cover a more cohesive look. And if you're going to use different colors for your fonts, try to keep it to about 2 or 3 primary colors that work well with the cover's overall color scheme. An exception to this rule is if you're creating a really cartoony cover for a kid's book. In that case, you have a little more wiggle room to play with, but don't go crazy with the colors. Okay, on to tip 8. Use graphics to visually define your book's contents. I hate to beat this point to death, but once again, your book cover is a graphic, not a text document, so make it look like one. The title of your book, as well as any other text that you have on your cover, may not be a clear indicator as to the contents of your book. If you're creating a blank comic book template, try to find a way to incorporate one page of the templates onto your cover imagery. If it's a coloring book, show a colored-in version of one of the images from your book interior, or just some examples of uncolored ones. If it's a book used for drawing, give them examples of what can be drawn in this book. Even something as simple as a daily journal can benefit from this technique. This is the cover from my kids' daily journal, the Learn One New Thing Every Day book. Each page contains a prompt to encourage the child using the journal to learn something new every day. Now, because the book revolves around learning, I chose to use an owl as the main character, because owls have traditionally been depicted as being wise whenever used in children's cartoons or literature. So an owl writing in a journal is the perfect graphical depiction for this type of book. When it comes to activity books like coloring books and puzzle books, showing the customer a sample of what they're actually buying can be the very thing that gets you the sale. The old saying, "A picture is worth 1,000 words," is most definitely true in this case. Alright, on to tip 9. Use the back of your book cover to promote your author page. Now normally, the back of your book cover is the spot where you give the customer a little more information as to what they're going to find inside the pages of your book. But it's also the perfect place for you to promote your other books. Now if you watched my video 10 tips on how to promote your low content books, then you know that I recommend setting up an author's page on Amazon and pointing a custom URL to that page. If you haven't watched that video, I'll put a link to it at the end of this one. The back of your book cover is the perfect spot for you to promote that URL. If your customers really enjoy your book, there's a pretty good chance that they'll also enjoy some of your other activity books. If you haven't seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross with Jack Lemmon, Al Pacino, and Alec Baldwin, it's a movie about the life of a salesman. And there's an acronym that they've coined in that film referred to as ABC, Always Be Closing, which in layman's terms simply means to always be trying to get the sale. This acronym applies to any type of sales, including low-content books. So if you have an opportunity to make additional sales to your customer, you better be acting on it. You've already convinced your customer to buy your product. If they liked it, then you've also won their trust. Putting a URL on the back of your book that will take them to an Amazon page that displays all of your books is going to be the easiest chance to upsell them that you'll ever get. And this brings us to my final tip. Use the spine of your book for titles and URLs. Now there are 2 reasons why putting your book's title as well as your custom URL on the spine of your book are so important. And the first one has to do with the book's title. Have you ever noticed on your book's Amazon product page this little section here that shows you all of the different sellers of your book? Now you may look at some of these prices and think, man, these are way overpriced. But to be honest, these sellers are not actually trying to compete with Amazon. They would never be able to. What they're hoping for is that at some point, this book will go out of print. And when it does, they will be the only ones who are selling it, which means that they can charge pretty much anything they want. So what does that have to do with putting the title of your book on the spine? Absolutely nothing. I just thought you should know that one day some of these sellers may actually be making bigger profits off your book than you do. Kind of stings, doesn't it? Moving on. But what a lot of these third-party sellers also do is supply brick and mortar stores all around the world. That's right, your low-content book may be on a bookshelf in some brick and mortar store at this very moment. Now, if you've ever stepped foot into a brick and mortar bookstore, you've probably noticed that only about 1% of the books actually get front-faced, meaning that the front cover of the book is actually visible to the customer while it's on the shelf. The other 99% of the books only have the spine showing. So if you want a chance of having a customer grab your book off the shelf and buying it, then you better make sure that they can clearly read the title of your book on the spine. Now you may be thinking, wait a second, what do I care if that book sells or not? I'm not going to get a royalty off that sale. I already got my royalty when the seller bought it from Amazon. And you'd be right. But what do you think the seller is going to do after that book sells? He's probably going to buy another copy to replace the one he just sold. And he will continue to do that as long as the book keeps selling. When you see these coloring books on Amazon that are selling thousands of copies per month, they're not all being sold direct to customers on Amazon. A lot of them are being purchased in bulk by third-party sellers that are being shipped to small brick-and-mortar bookstores. Now, I'm not talking about your big chain bookstores. I'm talking about your mom-and-pop bookstores, your book outlets, your flea markets, and so on. You've probably noticed that every once in a while, Amazon will lower the price of your book way below what you had set it at. What they're trying to do is encourage customers on Amazon, as well as third-party sellers, to pick up a few copies at this lower price. That way, when the price does eventually go back up, the third-party sellers will be able to sell their copies at a more competitive price offline. And if they do sell their copies, then there's a good chance that they'll come back and buy more, which will raise the sales ranking of the book, and this will place it higher up in search results. That means more Amazon customers will see it and potentially buy it, leading to more reviews, higher rankings, and more sales. It's a whole snowball effect. But none of that happens if your book doesn't get discovered on the shelf at the bookstore. And no one will ever discover your book if you don't have your book's title on the spine. Now, as for the custom URL, you've already given them the URL to your Amazon author page on the back of the book. But if you're doing this whole low-content book business properly, then you probably have some other income stream set up for times when your book sales are slow. And if you do, then you probably have a main web page that has links to all of your social media sites like YouTube and Instagram, as well as links to some of your other products like digital downloads and apparel. And if you don't, you should. And if you're not sure why having all of these additional income streams is so important to your business, then be sure and watch my last video, how much YouTube paid me my first month and how I doubled it. You can find that video in my Getting Started on YouTube playlist. Remember that Glenn Ross acronym I told you about earlier, ABC, always be closing? The bottom part of your book's spine is a perfect spot to promote not only your other books, but your entire online business as well. Sure, it's great making a $3 royalty when a customer buys your book, but do you want to know what's really great? Having that same customer subscribe to your YouTube channel and then proceed to watch all of your videos, which will end up making you 10 times in ad revenue what you made off that one book sale. If you're serious about creating a passive income for yourself that will one day replace your full-time job, then you need to start thinking a lot bigger, and you need to start taking advantage of every promotional opportunity that you get. Okay, so hopefully this video has given you a much better idea of how to improve the quality and overall appearance of your KDP book covers. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, in addition to having great book covers, if you want to be selling books on Amazon, then you need to make sure that you're choosing the right niches, and that requires a lot of research on your part. And if you're not quite sure how to do that research, then be sure and check out my video, How to Make $1,000 a Month Selling Low-Content Books on BookBolt. I'll put a link to that video at the end of this one. And if you're new to my channel, or self-publishing altogether, then be sure and check out my playlist, Self-Publishing 101. That playlist has everything you need to get your KDP business up and running. And you can find a link to it right here. Until next time, take care.